We start our introduction to conducting research with experiments because experiments are the gold standard for all research in the social sciences, but also in the hard sciences like biology and chemistry. It is very important to get across to you that even other forms of research utilize the logic of experiments, even if they are not really experiments. Hopefully, this will become more clear to you as we continue throughout the semester. Regardless, start memorizing the 4 parts of the classic experimental model because we will be using them throughout the semester. Please know that your chapter covers non-experimental designs. We will drop this topic area because we have other lectures and readings on those methods. Instead, I will add more information about quasi-experimental designs, natural experiments, and online experiments. You may want to take extra notes for these sections. Let's get started. Experiments are a cornerstone of quantitative research, particularly within the realm of psychology and increasingly in sociology. They are designed to test hypotheses under controlled conditions, often in laboratory settings, with the primary goal of eliminating threats to internal validity. This method allows researchers to isolate the effects of an independent variable on a dependent variable, thereby establishing causal relationships. In social sciences, understanding experimental methodology is crucial not only for conducting research, but also for interpreting findings derived from experimental designs. The classic experiment involves pre-testing and post-testing participants, using both experimental and control groups to compare outcomes. This structure ensures that any observed changes in the dependent variable can be attributed to the manipulation of the independent variable, rather than external factors. The rigorous nature of experimental research provides a high level of internal validity, making it a preferred method when ethical and practical considerations allow. The classic experimental design is characterized by 3 key components: the use of independent and dependent variables, the implementation of pre-testing and post-testing, and the inclusion of both experimental and control groups. Altogether, that gives us 4 groups: the pre-test group, the post-test group, the experimental group, and the control group. In this design, the experimental group receives the treatment or stimulus, while the control group does not. Serving as a baseline for comparison, both of these groups are assessed prior to and after the implementation of the experiment. If the experimental group changes more than the control group, you can say with some certainty that your stimulus made a real change in people's lives. That is a pretty powerful thing to be able to say. Random assignment is employed to ensure that both groups are equivalent in all respects prior to the administration of the independent variable. This process helps control for extraneous variables and enhances the internal validity of the study. Pre-testing allows researchers to measure the dependent variable before the treatment, while post-testing assesses the impact of the treatment. By comparing the results from both tests, researchers can determine the effect of the independent variable. This design is particularly effective in isolating causal relationships and is widely used in psychological and social science research. Let's review a couple of examples of studies that have employed a classic experimental design. First, in a study examining PTSD among police officers, 100 participants from the Winnipeg Police Department were randomly assigned to either an experimental or control group. Both groups underwent a pretest to assess their levels of PTSD symptoms, revealing no significant differences. The experimental group was then exposed to a video depicting a car accident, while the control group viewed a scenic travel video. Following the exposure, Both groups completed a post-test to reassess PTSD symptoms. The results indicated that the experimental group reported higher levels of PTSD symptoms compared to the control group. This study effectively demonstrates the use of pre-testing and post-testing, random assignment, and the manipulation of an independent variable, video content, to measure its impact on a dependent variable, PTSD symptoms. The design ensures that the observed differences are attributable to the treatment, highlighting the strength of experimental methodology in establishing causality. In another study focused on depression, participants were randomly assigned to either an experimental or control group. All participants completed a pretest to evaluate their depression levels, with no significant differences found between the groups. The experimental group was then asked to read an article suggesting severe and pervasive prejudice against their racial group, while the control group read a different article. A post-test was administered to measure changes in depression levels. The findings revealed that the experimental group reported higher levels of depression, indicating that exposure to prejudice-related content influenced emotional responses. This study underscores the importance of random assignment and the use of control groups in experimental research. It also illustrates how the manipulation of an independent variable, article content, can affect a dependent variable, depression levels, providing insights into the psychological impact of perceived prejudice. Random assignation is a critical component of experimental research, ensuring that participants are equally likely to be assigned to any condition. This process helps control for extraneous variables and enhances the internal validity of the study. Strict random assignment methods, such as coin flipping or computer-generated sequences, can result in unequal sample sizes, which are generally not problematic. However, for statistical efficiency, researchers often use modified random assignment techniques like block randomization. In block randomization, all conditions occur once in a sequence before being repeated, maintaining balanced group sizes. This method is typically pre-planned and executed using computer programs. Despite its strengths, random assignation is not foolproof. Chance variations can still lead to confounding variables. Nevertheless, its effectiveness increases with larger sample sizes, and inferential statistics account for its limitations. Random assignation remains a hallmark of robust experimental design, distinguishing it from other research methodologies. Internal validity refers to the extent to which a study design supports the conclusion that changes in the dependent variable are due to the independent variable. Experimental research typically offers the highest internal validity compared to any other method of collecting data. This is because it employs random assignment and manipulation of variables, effectively controlling for extraneous influences. Quasi-experimental research, while manipulating the independent variable, lacks random assignment, which can introduce confounding factors. Non-experimental research has the lower internal validity due to the absence of manipulation and control. Changes in the dependent variable in non-experimental designs may be attributed to reversed causality or third variables. Why do we use other methods of research other than experiments, given their lower levels of validity? There are many reasons, mostly related to our ability to reproduce the experimental model in real-world settings. Consider this. How would you conduct an experiment with a sample of drug dealers? Could you create an experiment that reflected the entire population of the world? You may be able to do these things, but it would be challenging and costly. Hence, social scientists utilize a variety of methods to achieve their goals. Regardless, understanding internal validity is crucial for evaluating the reliability of research findings and determining the strength of causal inferences. Researchers must carefully consider design choices to ensure the validity and credibility of their studies. Quasi-experiments are employed when random assignment is not possible, often due to ethical or practical constraints. In these designs, the independent variable is still manipulated, allowing researchers to test causal hypotheses. However, participants are assigned to groups by the researcher, the participants themselves, or both. To infer causality, 3 criteria must be met. The independent variable precedes the dependent variable in time. The variables are related, and the relationship is not explained by other causal agents. Researchers identify comparison groups that closely resemble the treatment group in baseline characteristics. Techniques like regression discontinuity design and propensity score matching help reduce selection bias and enhance the validity of findings. Quasi-experiments bridge the gap between experimental and non-experimental research, offering a practical approach to studying causal relationships in real-world settings. They are particularly prevalent in social sciences, where true experiments may be impractical or unethical. An illustrative example of a quasi-experiment involves a study on PTSD among firefighters. The researcher implemented a PTSD awareness program at one fire hall and compared the results with another fire hall that did not receive the program. Although the researcher did not randomly assign firefighters to the halls, she ensured that the selection was not based on existing PTSD levels, avoiding directional bias. The study found lower PTSD levels in the treatment fire hall, suggesting the program's effectiveness. However, the lack of random assignment means that other factors, such as differences in firefighter demographics or work environments, could have influenced the results. This example highlights both the strengths and limitations of quasi-experimental designs, while they allow for causal inference through manipulation of the independent variable. The absence of random assignment necessitates careful consideration of potential confounding variables. Quasi-experiments are valuable tools in applied research, especially when ethical or logistical constraints preclude true experiments. Natural experiments are observational studies where external circumstances or events assign subjects to treatment or control groups in a way that mimics random assignment. These experiments are particularly valuable in social sciences when traditional randomized controlled trials are impractical or unethical. Unlike controlled experiments, researchers in natural experiments do not manipulate variables directly. Instead, they take advantage of naturally occurring conditions that divide populations into groups. This technique allows for the study of causal relationships without direct intervention. For example, a sudden policy change in one region, but not another, can serve as a natural experiment to evaluate its impact. Natural experiments are commonly used in fields such as epidemiology, economics, psychology, and political science. They help researchers draw causal inferences by comparing outcomes across different groups exposed to varying conditions. The key feature that distinguishes natural experiments from other observational studies is the presence of a naturally occurring division that resembles random assignment, enabling more robust conclusions about cause and effect. Natural experiments have been applied in various real-world contexts to study the effects of policy changes, environmental factors, and social interventions. One notable example is the evaluation of minimum wage increases. Researchers compare employment rates in regions that implemented wage hikes with those that did not. allowing them to assess the policy's impact on job availability and economic outcomes. Another example involves smoking bans in public places. By analyzing health outcomes before and after the implementation of such legislation, researchers can determine the effectiveness of these policies in reducing smoking-related illnesses. Education reforms also provide fertile ground for natural experiments. When a new curriculum is introduced in certain school districts, but not others, researchers can compare student performance across these regions to evaluate the reform's success. These examples demonstrate how natural experiments leverage naturally occurring variations to study causal effects in a way that is both ethical and practical. They offer valuable insights into the consequences of real-world changes and help inform future policy decisions. Online experiments are a modern approach to conducting research in the social sciences, leveraging internet platforms to recruit participants, deliver stimuli, and collect data remotely. These experiments are particularly prevalent in fields such as psychology, sociology, marketing, and human-computer interaction. The primary advantage of online experiments lies in their scalability and cost-effectiveness. Researchers can reach a broader and more diverse population than traditional in-person studies, which often rely on limited local samples. Additionally, online experiments allow for rapid data collection and the ability to simulate controlled environments without the logistical constraints of physical labs. Platforms like Amazon Mechanical Turk and Prolific have become popular tools for executing these studies, offering access to participants from various demographic backgrounds. A notable example of an online experiment in social science is the 2023 study conducted by Demirovich, Rogers, and Robbins, which investigated gender differences in wage negotiations. This study utilized an artificial wage negotiation scenario delivered through an online platform, engaging 307 participants. The researchers aimed to understand how gender and gender role attitudes influenced the decision to negotiate wages. The findings revealed that gender role attitudes significantly moderated the willingness to negotiate, although they did not affect the outcomes of the negotiations. This suggests that while societal norms and personal beliefs may impact one's approach to negotiation, they do not necessarily determine the success of the negotiation itself. The study highlights the effectiveness of online experiments in exploring complex social behaviors within controlled settings. By simulating real-world scenarios online, researchers were able to isolate specific variables and draw meaningful conclusions about social dynamics. This research underscores the potential of online experimentation to contribute valuable insights into issues such as gender equity and workplace behavior. Despite the challenges of applying the experimental model to the study of people, it is essential for two reasons. First, the experimental model is the only way to fully demonstrate causation. It is the highest standard in social science research. Second, the logic of the experiment is utilized to assess other research. That is, surveys, ethnographies, and other methods we will be reviewing this semester will be assessed by how well they are able to demonstrate elements of the experiment. By having a good sense of how experiments are conducted, you will be able to better assess any research project that is presented to you. It is a great tool as a social scientist.